Plants Will Save Us is a podcast by the Beneficial Plant Research Association, a nonprofit organization that researches plants to benefit human and planetary life. Plants are keystone species of culture and biodiversity preservation. Here we explore the ways in which we can, as a species, use them for medicine, food, culture, and clothing. Because without plants, we do not exist. Plants will save us. I am so excited to introduce Stephen King. Dr. King has served as the head of sustainable supply, ethnobotanical research, and intellectual property since 2004 at Jaguar Health. Prior to that, he served as the vice president of ethnobotany and conservation at Shaman Pharmaceuticals, Inc. Dr. King has been recognized by the international natural products and conservation community for the creation and dissemination of research on the long-term sustainable harvest and management of Croton lecleri and the widespread source of crofelemer. Dr. King is currently a member of the board of directors of Healing Forest Conservatory, a California not-for-profit public benefit corporation. He is also a scientific board member of BPRA. Dr. King holds an MS and PhD in biology from the City University of New York, and he received his first doctoral fellowship granted by the Institute of Economic Botany of the New York Botanical Garden. We are so excited to see you today, Stephen, and so honored to have you on the board of BPRA. I know you have a long history with Dr. Andrew Weil, with a lot of the early people in BPRA, and we would love to get started today on you sharing what that story is and how that history with BPRA has brought you here today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here with you, and I am so pleased that you guys rebirthed BPRA. I'll try and keep the short version, but basically I went and lived with the tribe of Indigenous people in the Peruvian Amazon for 9 months in 1978, 79. And upon my return, I was studying the diet and medicinal plants of that group of quite amazing Indigenous people. And upon my return, I went to visit Tim Plowman at the Field Museum of Natural History because I actually live in the Chicago area and was suggested I go see him. I went to see him, and that kind of changed my life. He became a lifelong mentor and friend until his untimely passing. He sent me to see Richard Schultes at Harvard, where Balick and Wade Davis were graduate students. Tim was incredibly supportive and encouraging of me, having just spent a bunch of time in the rainforest as an undergraduate. I was getting a bachelor's in human ecology at the College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine. It was sort of a self-created internship. And Schultes was also incredibly supportive and sort of took me under his wing, as he did with hundreds of people around the world. And then I remember sitting in Maine in a cold winter night looking at the first BPRA brochure, which was beautiful, talking about coca and Yoko and San Vidrago. And I actually had some touch with Honey Williams because she was one of the people behind doing this with those guys. So here I was, an undergrad, sort of in a remote place, Bar Harbor, Maine, in the winter. It's remote in the winter. I pursued as much as I could discussions and conversations with Tim and Schultes, and then ultimately ended up, working on many of those plants. In fact, Yoko, one of the first plants, at one point, Tim had gotten me to ship a living sample from Peru to Florida, to the Tropical Botanic Garden there, so they could grow it. And that was not an easy thing to do, in that Peru had lots of rules and regulations, but I'd shipped some other things previously, so I kind of knew the ropes. Anyway, it was just as a young undergraduate, it was so inspiring as it is today, the vision.
I have to know, because, you are on my list of mentors and people that I've been following with close interest, all of the amazing things you've done, as well as Tim Plowman, Richard Schultes. When they were being supportive of your initial conversations, like, what was that like? Like, what was it like to interact with those two guys, and how did they support you? Were they, high-fiving you? Were they giving you contacts to follow up on, books to read? Like, what was that like as we think about this lineage?
Tim actually helped put together an ethnobotanical search group of myself, Wade Davis, and Calvin Sperling, with two Quechua-speaking anthropologists, Ed and Chris Frankamont, in Chinchero, Peru, where we did a 2-month study on the ethnobotanical survey of that community. And Tim manifested that because he knew Wade and he knew Calvin, who was a graduate student at Harvard, and he knew me. and he knew that I was sort of a Peru hand. And anyway, he put that together. He mentored us. He was routinely supportive. I got to go to the COCA meeting in Cornell that Tim put together, in that time phase. He was a mentor and a friend. Anytime I went to Chicago to visit my family, I'd go see him. We actually were going to do some field work in Brazil when he was sort of sick. It didn't ultimately work out. I was disappointed. We were going to do some basic collecting in Brazil. So basically, we tried to do field work, and he just sort of helped move me forward. Schultes, the first thing he said to me was, "Oh, you've been in my country." Because the Northwest Amazon, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, that's a geographic region in which, and those indigenous cultures, the Sequoias, are closely related to other Tucanoan-speaking peoples. I wanted to be a graduate student of Schultes at Harvard, and I was finishing my undergraduate. I applied to work with them, and he said, sadly, the Harvard is not allowing me to take any more students because he was moving toward the end of his sort of active phase, and he kept working till the day he died, basically. And then he helped us start Shaman Pharmaceuticals in 1990. He was on the board. The first part of the board helped us select a lot of the people. He kept a close eye on me, was always incredibly supportive. And, Schultes is a kind of human being who would send handwritten letters after meetings saying lovely, beautiful things to me about how I was doing, and just such a magnificent human being in his humanity. And so I got to see him on a semi-regular basis once we started Shaman. And he also said, go get your PhD with Mike Balick and Ian Prance at the Botanical Garden in New York, because they have an active program. And I did that, and Mike became both a mentor and a friend, as well as Prance. In fact, when Tim passed, Schultes read a beautiful Shakespearean poem at the service for Tim at the Field Museum. And Schultes has quite a flair for the dramatic in that way, and it was exquisite. So both those people had a profound influence on my life and inspired me deeply, as they have many, many, many people. That the COCA meeting that just took place in Peru was dedicated to Tim, which I didn't fully realize, and the museum in Medellin, the COCA project, which is an extraordinary museum and project, was also dedicated in part to Tim. So I told the people I might start crying at this meeting. I didn't fully understand there was such a strong Tim connection. So yeah.
The picture that is on the COCA Project website of Tim is beautiful. That black and white one that Susie found.
Yes. And they showed that image at the meeting. Tim Plowman was an extraordinary human being.
Tracy and I met when I was doing Andrew Weil's fellowship for MDs down in Tucson. Tracy was volunteering in the program, and then we met up in San Francisco and tried to track down Tom Carlson. We just didn't get our kind of everything lined up, and I was waiting at some coffee shop at 7 a.m. before he had to go over to, I believe, UCSF or Berkeley at that moment. And so we didn't actually meet up, but the Tom Carlson connection is another thread here that kind of ties a lot of us together. One of the MDs that was at Shaman Pharmaceuticals.
Extraordinary human being, from his Save a Foundation work with the Blindness Project to helping manage and guide international field work all around the planet, and also just a magnetic, incredible human being.
How did Shaman Pharmaceuticals get started? You referred to it, and then I've always wondered that.
The truth is, it was the brainchild of Lisa Conti, and the backstory is she was hiking on Kilimanjaro. At the time, she was working as a venture capitalist. She ran into a herb seller on the mountain in Kenya. I guess, is that Kenya, right? Then you go up to Kilimanjaro. And she said, "Oh, you ought to try this plant medicine will be helpful for you for this and that." And she kind of got in her mind the idea of, hey, plants as drugs and new medicines, this could be a possibility for starting a company. She came back to the U.S., got 5 credit cards, got the firm she was working with to give her a desk, and said, "Hey, go for it. If it works, we'll help you reimburse you." And she maxed out the 5 credit cards, flying all around the United States, talking like Schultes and everybody else. Schultes said, "Hey, if you're going to do this, you got to have an ethnobotanist on staff, not just some consultant." He said, "I think I know one. I just finished at the Botanical Garden and was working at the National Academy of Sciences, and I said I'd do it in a heartbeat. The second she showed up and asked me, I said, "Of course." So it was her, and then Dennis McKenna was a part of the first.
Okay.
Emma's Health, Larry Myerson, a pharmacologist, and the scientific strategy team of Shaman was Mike Balick and Joel Sujarto and Anthony Anderson and Robert Raffoff, the chemist, and then her father was a pharmacist, and a handful of other scientists, and it grew. James Duke Farnsworth became part of it. And then we hired as many amazing people as we could. So
How did you get interested in ethnobotany?
I first went and did a paramedic work in Guatemala at the age of 16, helping volunteer doctors and dentists, give inoculations and do teeth removals and stuff. That kind of got me stoked on rainforest. It was sort of a tropical part of the Rio Pola Chic in Guatemala. And before that, to believe it or not, I actually read a book called Keep the River on Your Right, which is about a man named Tobias Schneebaum who got lost in the Amazon of Peru, was taken in by an indigenous group and lived with them for, I don't know, 8 or 9 months, something like that. And it's an amazing story, true story. In fact, he was on Big Cabot talking about cannibalism after he was in that journey. The book just lit my brain about Amazonian Indians. And it wasn't ethnobotany per se, but when I got this opportunity to go live and work with an indigenous group in the Peruvian Amazon, was asked to study their diet and medicinal plants, that got me pretty interested in that. And then when I met Plowman and Schultes, I was like, okay, this is a thing. I can do this.
How exciting.
It was.
One article that Laura and Tracy passed on to me that has been just inspiring is about your work and the collaborative work that you did in, I believe it's pronounced Buganda, the community that you brought together healers, and it's the classic and really well done community engaged project where everything it seems like you did over a long period of time was set by the community, guided by the community in response to community hopes and goals. And, that is certainly from what I know about Richard Schultes and, your work and other ethnobotanists that came out of that group, the focus is to not be repeating some of the mistakes that have happened in the past. And certainly BPRA, we're really hoping is community grounded, really making sure that we keep in mind intellectual property rights. So I would love to know kind of how those interactions took place. And that certainly can be a guide for us going forward with any project that we decide to set up.
The basic thing is dialogue, conversations, and listening to communities, sometimes for up to a year or two in advance before doing anything, which allows the process of listening and learning about what's important to become woven into any activity, any project. Also, repeat engagements, not just a one-off, like coming in and doing something and then going off someplace else, but going back and having long-term relationships where information is exchanged, data is exchanged, not just people, and bringing people from those countries. And also talking with communities at times is when they say no. Not interested, not just, we might have the greatest idea of something really cool to do and maybe even the funding to do it. And then might be, well, you know what, we're just not that interested. And that's a part of it too. So dialogue, reciprocity, listening, patience, multilingual communication, Tagalog, Spanish, French, whatever it is, and process, not having to do it quickly. I actually never been to Uganda. I've had some of the Ugandan principals at my dinner table in my house because they've come back and forth with us. But the team, Charles Limbach, Julie Chinnick, Susan Tarka Nelson, Tom Carlson, I don't think he did Uganda, but those are the people that then crafted the relationships. We have a fundamental philosophic guide that we need reciprocity and benefit sharing, the short, medium, and long term. Like you guys have the amazing scientific advisory board, and your primary board are all people, scientists that have been doing this kind of work for decades, so that you don't have to, it's a sort of a baseline. And you already have those people that are doing that, from Lisa Fringa to Cassie to all Mike Balick and the gentleman from Palau. So you have an amazing group of people that are part of your team.
I would love to hear you explaining what benefit sharing means to you and how Jaguar Health, Shaman Pharmaceuticals really established what that looks like even today. And I know we talk about this, that it's actually surprising how little research is still grounded in that foundation of benefit sharing, what that truly means. And as you are discussing this, when I was running Herbal Anthropology Project, which was my previous nonprofit, it felt like an aha moment knowing that the traditional knowledge division of the World Intellectual Property Organization even exists. Like, to find that was actually really challenging and really hard. And I know it's still fairly what we would consider new, last 30, 40 years, that it's been established in government, it's been established in nonprofits and researchers. And for those people listening that don't really understand what benefit sharing means, I would love for you to explain what that means to you, what that means to Jaguar Health, and what that means kind of for any researcher looking to support communities in their traditional knowledge preservation, documentation, and even further research.
The foundation of what we tried to do was to have benefit sharing be part of the process from the beginning. And you've probably seen the book, The Service Berry, that recently came out, which is a beautiful book. And what I love about that book is it talks about reciprocity and explains reciprocity at a more holistic global level. That's what benefit sharing is. It's about things going back and forth. It's about not one party or one group or one person visualizing or thinking or creating, but rather a flow of back and forth. I think a tangible example that brings me great personal delight. We're working with indigenous communities, about 19 different culture groups from the Peruvian Amazon who are sustainably harvesting and managing croton lecturi, that plant from which we create the various products that are on the market now and that we're trying to develop. Those communities, those people, grandmas, mothers, adult males, families are benefiting on a routine basis by being part of our network. They have a choice. They can decide to do it or not do it. They can decide to what degree to be involved. And we're talking about maybe 20,000 people over the past, 2 decades. And that's a very tangible example, somewhat unique in as much as there's an exchange of things. They're growing things and selling things to us and so on. Benefit sharing is, say, research programs where you're just looking at basic research would be, again, making certain that there is benefits as defined by the community that of importance to the community that are within the scope of what any given project could do. Maybe individual scientists have so much latitude to do that. Organizations have others. BPRA has others. So it's about finding a way to make sure that is a mutually beneficial, reciprocal. And as I'm reading The Service Berry, what I love about it is among the sequoias where I live, the Angatoria sequoias, if somebody goes hunting, they always share that peccary or that wild whatever with the rest of the community. There's a part in that book when she says, she's interviewing an indigenous person about, well, do you ever think about storing the meat for later rather than, giving it all away? And the indigenous person said, I don't understand that question. No, we store it in our friends' bellies. I mean, that's how we make this work. And at a fundamental level, that is benefit sharing and reciprocity. So I'd say anybody that wonders about benefit sharing, read that book. It really resonated deeply with me. And I hope that helps.
I mean, in the past, there was a time where benefit sharing may or may not have been occurring for certain groups of people, right? In the sense that, and I'd love to hear a little bit of background on that. I think now we're focused on moving forward, but we're not really looking at, the harms that were caused in the time where, I guess if we want to call it, colonialism at its finest. Yeah. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
The exploitation of local people, indigenous knowledge in countries has been going on for, centuries by Europeans, Americans. I think there's been a fair amount of focus on some of the concerns about quote unquote biopiracy and the impact of taking knowledge and not returning things and not having reciprocal exchange. It's gone from the most horrific that you can imagine from the rubber boom area where they were enslaving people to killing people as slaves basically to extract rubber and then sending that across the planet to more subtle forms of exploitation. There's been many, publications about that and concerns about that. And that was just standard practice, right? It's still going on. It's the Convention on Biological Diversity. There's so many things trying to structure ways such that it doesn't happen, but it depends on the actions and the intentions of the players, whether they be governments or scientists or for-profits. So that era should be over, but as we know, it's not always over.
I volunteered for Cassandra Quave when she was doing her PhD with Brad Bennett. Before that, there had been a lot of pharmacognosists and plant people going in and trying to discover new drugs from plants in the Amazon. But all of that really kind of stopped for a time period where countries didn't really want people coming in, or the drug companies coming in. And really, like Brazil, it was really hard to do any work. And I think that maybe our listeners may be interested in what exactly had kind of happened, that there was a real lull at that time.
I think that's still going on. I think the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Nagoya Protocol, the regimes that have been put in place, have opened the awareness of both governments and local communities about the exploitation that has happened historically. It has blocked lots of activities. The pharma sector has been less interested in plants in general, not just for that reason, but for a whole nother conversation. But it's made it very difficult for just straight up scientists doing taxonomic work or ecologistic work or ecological work to do that work, because the governments and or communities are so concerned and paranoid about that repeat exploitation. And in some ways it's backfired, in as much as what they really want to stop is, say, gringos coming in from a big company or supposed scientists. Oh, I'm just here doing research, and then that information goes into a company or even the public domain and gets used. But there's lots and lots of scientists just doing science who are being forced to undergo the same kinds of permissions, though their work has nothing to do with anything commercial, which is somewhat tragic, in as much as it's that they're often working with communities and help be empowering communities, geographic systems for documenting their territories and all good stuff. But the paranoia has shut down a lot of that and made it difficult for local scientists, even within the countries, to do this kind of work. And that was the antithesis, in my view, of the intention of those regimes like the Convention on Biological Diversity that were put in place to protect countries and cultures and their knowledge. So in some ways it's helped put good barriers up. In other ways, it's made it very, very difficult. And in some ways it made it extremely difficult for local scientists, which is not the idea.
So do you see a way forward through that?
Yes. I mean, if we think about BPRA, you're looking at ways to empower communities to document, maintain, manage, conserve cultural, biocultural, and you all have experience doing that. That shouldn't really be difficult, because there might be a chance to find sustainable produced products, but if they're not pharmaceuticals, it becomes more in the realm of just commerce, which is not as challenging at times. The way forward for that kind of work is happening, and still happens, and won't be blocked. If companies are trying to do work looking for new products like pharmaceuticals, that's very challenging. We've been at a 2-year process with Peru to get permission for our cocoa work, and we're almost there via the Nagoya Protocol. But many organizations don't have the stamina, time, money, or ability to go through those processes.
I love this discussion of the variety of benefits that we can explore with communities. I feel like when I first started thinking about this, it was more along the lines of what Shaman Pharmaceuticals did, which is, let's help a community to develop a pharmaceutical that will make them millions of dollars, and then they can share it with their community. And with Laura and Tracy and our board's help, I've been expanding out what benefits mean. And it could be simply, an ethnobotanical survey, or setting up a local herbarium, or developing, like you said, Steve, commerce on a product that's sustainably harvested. So, the spectrum of what benefit means is wide, as I'm starting to learn, and really, obviously, as we all know, should be driven by what the community wants.
I mean, think about one of your core board members, Mike Balick, in his work in Palau or other parts of the South Pacific, generating manuals on public health that describe plants in use. I mean, Laura, this is I think one of the communities said to him, "Hey, we'd like to do this. Could you help us do it?" And then he got involved to help them document their knowledge. And I was in Palau when one of the guides I was sort of kayaking with, a bunch of books of Mike's books came into the National Museum, and I bought a couple, and I gave one of the guide, and he was like, "Oh, this is fantastic. Palau and medicinal plant knowledge. Now I know better ways to manage." So, what better way than to apply this to the needs of public health of local people, as I know you're already thinking about and doing. That's a beautiful example. That one gives me goosebumps, because that's like, you can't get happier than do what you like to do and do something that other people would like you to do that makes people not Belize. I mean, there's a lot of examples of that going on, in my opinion, in the world of ethnobotany. Sort of to your question too, Tracy, how do you do it? You do what is a good thing and a right thing, and not only is everybody happy, but you're helping, conserve biocultural diversity and human health.
The involvement of academia and research, has been a limiting factor for a lot of I think, graduate students and even researchers in working with Indigenous peoples and regarding, very different ideals, I guess, and principles in regards to, like even just storytelling so that, the university could then own the graduate thesis, so the PhD thesis, and then in essence can own stories of, Indigenous peoples. I hope that that will change a little bit because I think that it would be really helpful for researchers too, to be able to build better relationships.
Some of the beautiful advances are when local indigenous people become scientists. It doesn't go away. It stays there. Or if they wish to, and you have the example of the Matseis with their 500 medicinal plant, document, which is not being shared or published or disclosed intentionally, but only amongst the communities. Or in COVID, when COVID happened, there were groups that were making COVID treatments in Northwest Amazon, treating each other, and it successfully is in many cases, as far as I understand. If you say in some sense, oh, the poor gringos can't go to foreign countries and do this exciting research because of these barriers, if you do it right, you can. And if you're working with local counterparts who are literally your co-investigators, and maybe they're teaching you, but you're teaching them, your reciprocity. That is a way I think where they can continue to happen. Though you did put your finger on when those studies and so on would come back and get published, regardless of how a university looks at it. Once they get into the public domain, then they can also be accessed with people who, even the articles say, you cannot utilize this information for the benefit of some product without making sure that there's some return to the communities. That's nice and that's important and that's true, but it's hard to enforce. So there's...
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, right, anytime there's a publication on herb or botanical that's used in supplements, nutritional supplements, that usually increases sales. And so that is an indirect, for, billion-dollar industry, tens of $1 billion really. And then to have none of that money's going back to people that could have shared their knowledge for.
It's a hot button topic. I wrote a piece for Overground a long time ago. The phytomenacee, the supplement industry, seemed to think they were somehow obviated or not required to be engaged in such relationships, because the margins were lower. It's harder to come up with large amounts of things, and yet they would use that as a promotional tool for the products and all that. And that's just not right. There's some companies that take the right approach, and there are some indigenous-led run companies where they're doing it, in which case, they're the ones managing it, assuming they do it right amongst themselves. Well, everybody was focusing on the pharma exploitation that's taken place historically. Meanwhile, the multi-billion-dollar, supplement plant medicine, and I'm all for plant medicines. I think 90% of the time they're going to be more effective and appropriate than a pharmaceutical for many things. But they shouldn't be relieved of that same obligation to do that kind of reciprocity of benefit sharing at whatever level they're able to do so, particularly when they're utilizing that knowledge as part of the promotional activities.
Yesterday, I was looking at, from the Herbalgram, Mark Blumenthal, where they go ahead and add up like the top 40, herbs, right, that are being sold. And you see how much money that is. And then if you go and type in one of those herbs, say into PubMed, and you see that there's been no research that's been done recently, and all of this money that is accumulating, and yet the benefits are not necessarily going to the customer or the people that information came from, right? Benefit sharing.
Right.
It's going straight into somebody's pocket.
If the communities are involved in the production of the material in an ethical, sustainable, appropriate, fair trade manner, that's a form of benefit. If they're not being exploited and inappropriately, taken advantage of, and then the people receiving the medicines, they're getting benefits. So there's some stuff going back and forth. But you're right, the companies, if they're making a bunch of money and they're not sharing it in some form or fashion, I just think that's wrong. It's not morally right. It's not ethically right. It's not legally right, in my view. Some of the governments, they're not as concerned about, to put it mildly, their indigenous constituents, but they do like commerce and trade. So they have a mixed motivation of their willingness to enforce.
It's a hot button issue.
Yeah, it was even, I got to tell you, when the first crazy guy from Palo Alto filed a patent on a variety of ayahuasca, the whole thing went insane in the 90s. Fast forward now, ayahuasca is, people are selling it at ceremonies all over the world, individuals and so on. There's many, many patents. That's a whole other hot topic, but I'm amazed to see how that's evolved, from one guy trying to patent a variety, which was ridiculous, to now, it's part of commerce all over the planet.
There's such a resurgence in psychedelic use, and we have to be careful that it's sustainable.
In the benefit sharing part too. I mean,
Yeah. No, totally. Not just that it's sustainable, but that there's benefit sharing. Yes. I mean, but also like a traditional, very important medicine, sacred medicine for a group of people that that people that it's not their sacred plant, but they just like to use it, that it could become like extinct from something like that. Could be,
absolutely.
I mean, that might be a little drastic, but yeah, that could be limiting. That's sad and scary, and that then, that those people also own the patents to the plant. Yeah, some problems need to be worked out. Yeah.
Agreed. Fortunately, in the case of the psychoactive coca, that's one of the BPRA's focus, there's not going to be any supply issues or over harvesting. The issues of indigenous knowledge and relationships and, appropriate production and stuff, that's real, but we won't be looking at that problem.
I think we need to do a separate podcast about psychedelics, specifically from the global south and the appropriation, misuse, and benefit sharing, and how we can identify maybe a cultural exchange versus appropriation and benefit sharing, because I've been having many conversations personally with people about what to do, knowing the work that we do, knowing the work that I personally do as an herbalist. And it's a really hard answer sometimes to come up with one perfect solution, because it's so important to people to access ayahuasca, so important for people to access peyote, all these sacred medicines of people that are generally not of those lineages, and having these profound effects that they seemingly wouldn't have otherwise, even though I have opinions about that. I am very curious. I think I want us to pin this conversation, because I think that's a very important conversation to have in not just many like white communities and European American communities, but in communities that are wanting this to still exist in the global south, because they're making money and they're supporting their community. And there's just so many conversations all happening at the same time, with always an issue with exploitation in the process. So
I agree with you very much. It's a whole big, important topic.
absolutely. I know we could talk to you for 3 hours, but I am going to ask you the question we ask everyone at the end of each podcast is, how do you think plants will save us?
Plants are saving us right now. Plants have always saved us. Plants will always save us. In fact, we will never be segregated or separated from the food, medicine, air, water, purification process of plants. Plants are saving us in terms of medicine. They're saving us in terms of food. They're saving us in terms of ecosystems and basic public health, air quality. The more we align ourselves with plants as part of us and as our saviors, the better for all of us, the planet, ourselves, and the plants.
We're so honored to have you as part of our board, and already our conversations and connections and our work together, as early as it hasn't even been a year since BPRA has been up and running, has already been so supportive and beneficial for us and the projects that we're looking to get started around the world with Indigenous and local communities. So I just want to say thank you for all of the work you've done these last, 50 years on the important work that really puts the communities at the center of the work that you're doing. So thank you again.
Well, thank you. Right back at you. Frankly, I am so delighted that BPRA has morphed the Phoenix, that I thank you for breathing life back into it and making it happen. It gives me goosebumps when I first saw it. So no, my thanks to all of you. And I know you've all been doing this sort of work your whole careers too. So how fun and how wonderful.
Thank you so much for being here, for all of those words.
Thank you.
Plants Will Save Us is a podcast produced by Laura Ash, Tracy Bentuso, and David Kiefer. To find out more about the Beneficial Plant Research Association, visit bpra.org. Thank you so much. We will see you next time.